A sea of green as we get to the end of July, but this green harbors a very insidious pest when it comes to sheep.
It is mid-July, almost the end of July now, and today we're going to talk about the #1 downfall to Icelandic sheep. So every July we hit the same roadblock, and every year we think we've done better, and every year the same problem arises. And you'll see in my hands, wormer. It is that time of year, the Barber Pole worm is in full effect, and every year our little lambs seem to get just wasted by it. This year we've been on the ball more, we've kept them separate, we've got them up at the barn so we can stay on top of this really, really well, and still we are struggling.
What are you doing?
So it doesn't matter, at least we find, how much you rotate them, how much you change the pastures, how many times you clean them. It seems like once the barber pole is established, it's a real tough one to get off your property. Barber pole can survive the winters even here now, so it doesn't matter if it skips a year, we're still gonna see it coming. So basically the reason that we have all these young ones up at the barn is so we can check their eyes for color, because the barber pole worm sucks blood, and you'll see here as I pull down on Bob, that eye is super pale. You'll see there, Bob is super pale, almost white, and Bob has been wormed. It just keeps tackling them over and over, and we keep trying to battle it. So we do the FAMACHA score. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but the FAMACHA score, we'll write it on the bottom here, so if you want to Google that yourselves. But it is something that so many people skip checking, and we find with the Icelandic you can't. Every day, every 2 days, I'm checking these guys to make sure it's not getting worse. We're looking for signs of improvement after worming. And Chris is having trouble holding the camera steady because Buddy is attacking his knees. But one thing that you'll find is it's really hard to tell, because just because we've wormed them, it takes time for that blood level to come up and for the eyes to get pink again. And this is where we get complacent. 5 treatments is what they need, and sometimes we think they're not too bad. So we do 3 and say we're going to wait and see, because we don't want the worms to build up a tolerance to our wormer, and then we're back at square one again. So, really? So today we're upping the game from our usual fembenzol, which is what we usually use to treat the barber pole, and we're going to Quest. Quest is a different drug, basically, to try and battle these worms, and we're going to blitz them out with this and hope for the best. So these are an equine wormer, not recommended for goats or sheep, so you're doing this at your own risk. We've been doing this for years, but basically you're doing a 5 times dose for a sheep or a goat. So we're going 100 kg, which is about 220 pounds, I believe, which each of these guys are probably getting close to the 50-60 pound range now. So that is what we've been working on as a standard. You don't want to underworm, because that is what really causes that tolerance buildup, is not giving enough to actually decimate them. So today, up in the game, Bob seems ready to go. He knows the drill. Come here, bud. Oh, basically just bring him over. I love this for the fact that it's just... You had, and you had. You just had. Oh, everybody wants their wormer. They all think it's a treat. Hey, Wally, what do you think? We decided to name this guy Wally or Walnut because he's such a cute brown color. So if I can get Buddy to kind of put his head up and look at us a little bit, you can see right there. See that? I don't even have to move his eyelid, and you can see on him that white that's already starting above. So when I open his lid, it's going to be super pale. And Buddy is somebody. Buddy is a sheep that has already been treated 4 times for this. So this is going to be his 5th dose, but first dose with the more heavy duty Quest stuff. So fingers crossed, every year we lose at least 1 lamb to this worm, but hopefully this year we can keep them all alive. So here's Buddy that I just mentioned about the top of his eye, and look. Hey, bud. Very pale. So we've got it set to our 5-time dose. In it goes. I'm pretty sure it's apple flavored, so they love it. So even though in this video we're sort of focusing a little bit on the veterinarian, chemical, pharmaceutical wormer, there are natural methods that can help with prevention. You really need to be doing these all throughout their year, and that's where it kind of comes in as a keyword. You need to keep doing it all the time, and that's where we slip up a lot, and we need to improve, and we know we need to improve. But one thing I make is a ton of apple scrap vinegar, basically apple cider vinegar, except for it's made with all the peels and the cores. I make jars and jars of this every year, and we put it into their water, as well as all of our other livestock gets it as well. So that's a great way to help prevent. And garlic powder. This is actually garlic scape powder, but garlic powder, garlic scape, anything like that mixed in with their day-to-day minerals is a great way to get them a little bit of a natural wormer as well. I've also heard cedar trees, cedar boughs, are a great dewormer as well. We don't have a lot of cedar, so that's not something that we can just throw them willy-nilly, but I've heard that it does work if you happen to be on a property with a lot of cedar. So we're now today going to give them some fresh garlic powder and apple cider vinegar in their water and minerals. And even though we are already using that chemical wormer, we're still going to use the natural methods as well, and hopefully that will boost them along.
One thing I will mention here too with some of these more natural remedies, the garlic, the apple cider vinegar, is not every animal in the flock wants to consume these. So it's very hard. I mean, if you only had one sheep, it's very easy to monitor that self-medication rate. It's hard to do that with a flock of sheep. So the best we can do is add it to their water, add it to their minerals. Of course, another thing that definitely helps in addition to the loose minerals is this trace block that we give them. We've obviously got to replace this soon, but it does help.
So I'm going to put this down. I still have my 2 milking girls in here, so I'm betting they're going to be the first ones in here to devour this. But Bob's looking interested, so let's see.
When it comes to lambs, or sheep in general, a pretty common indicator, although it is hot right now, is the laying down. And sheep have a tendency to try to hide things. So we know that these two have definitely got a bit of a worm load, and they're not out grazing. But we'll see what happens.
Another common sign Chris just mentioned about, the kind of laziness under the tree, lagging behind the pack. But bottle jaw, when you get to that point that you start seeing that sac build up under their jaw, that means you're in a bad situation and you might have missed your opportunity to actually break out the big guns with the wormer. So definitely pay attention for that. I don't have a sheep with that this year, which is awesome, but definitely keep an eye out for that. Google it so you know what you're looking for. But all in all, this year, we're doing an okay job, I think. Look at this sheep. He's being so good. What a good fellow.
So I'm going to come in with sort of the, I guess, just discussion, the unpopular, unpleasant side of this. Is I'm sure some people are going to say, well, why don't you breed for worm resistance? And the reality of it is, we do some selection for that, but we have a very small flock. And I think the internet is full of information of that's the solution, which is true. But getting there and actually achieving that is really hard, and it's a numbers game. Realistically, the only way to actually do this is survival of the fittest. And I'm going to say it, that doesn't work on a small scale because A, our sheep aren't free to roam around the way that sheep in Iceland are or in other parts of the world. We don't have enough of them for that. So you could be experiencing extremely high losses. And while in the long term, that might actually achieve the goal of developing resistance, you're going to have hundreds, if not thousands of sheep die to get to that point. And that's counterproductive. And I think what makes it really difficult. Of course, rotation is also a tool that can be used to break parasite cycles. But when you start diving into the numbers of it, it's really hard to do it properly because your carrying capacity may be X number of sheep per acre, But if you're really going to rotate, you're probably looking at least in our area, at least 6 months rest between a sheep being on that area of pasture. You can start to see that you need a massive amount of area, which is really difficult, because the flip side to that is if the sheep run over it once, that pasture that you've stockpiled to later in the season is going to get to a part where it's not super palatable, which is part of our problem right now, because when we get to July, we're at that point that most of the grass and most of the forage we have has really slowed down. We're still located in a fairly sort of humid area, being in the Great Lakes region, which is another issue. So you kind of have this combination of effect where you have weaning, which has happened not that long ago. You have a slowdown of the pasture growth, and you have increased temperature, and you still have humidity. So basically what happens is the metabolism of the worms increases. So they're hatching faster, they're climbing vegetation faster. So you have a bunch of things in July for us that kind of all come together to create this sort of horrible situation that we never seem to actually get ahead of. And of course, what about multi-species grazing? Well, again, it's absolutely something that can help, because if you have a different species that can come in and be sort of a terminal animal, basically consumes those worms, means they don't pass into the sheep, and if they're not susceptible to it, that's fantastic. In theory, because the practice of multi-species grazing is a lot different from the theory of it. It requires managing different species, and we've tried this in a couple of different iterations. I'm going to say it with limited success. It's never really worked out stellar, because one of the biggest problems we have is competition. What basically ends up happening is you still need double, triple the amount of pasture space, because those animals are still competing for the same resource, which is the grass and forage. Another thing is having diverse pastures. And one thing we do find with the Icelandic sheep being a little more browser-ish than some sheep and some livestock, they will switch their preference over time. That can be a really good thing, but it can also be kind of a hard thing to work with, because their preference, i.e. right now we have our older sheep, they're stripping bark off apple trees. Plus side is there's no parasites on that bark, but the downside is later in the season the apples actually have a positive effect, or we think have a positive effect on reducing the issues of the Barber Pole worm. But it really requires some intricate pasture management, because you can kind of see the dilemma there. If they strip the bark and eat the browse, and that avoids the worm, that also kills the tree, which provides the benefit, and in long term it's not really sustainable. So a whole host of issues come with this. So this is a lot of talking with some shots of the sheep grazing behind us. But I think it's important, and I know this is going to be boring to some people, but theory is sound, whether it's pasture rotation, multi-species grazing, natural worming methods, etc. They do all factor into this, but putting it all at a homestead or small farm scale into practice is difficult. If you have thousands of acres and you have thousands or hundreds of sheep, it's a lot easier, because you probably have a lot more resources to allow you to do those things. And if you have losses, as horrible as this sounds to some folks, when you have hundreds of sheep, you can afford to lose 10, 20, 30 of them and use natural selection. But when you only have a small flock and you're trying to feed yourself, it's hard. It's a struggle, and it's a struggle the entire time we've had Icelandic sheep. It's been a struggle for us, and I definitely would say it's the #1 downside to having Icelandic sheep. That being said, we do find that the adults do build up a tolerance, I'm not going to say immunity, but a tolerance to this as the year, or as they get older. So this is an issue for your young lamb crop, at least in our experience. But anyways, every year around this time we have a video like this come out, so this is this year's one. Stay tuned. We'll try to give an update as to what happens, whether we get ahead of it or not, and we'll just keep plugging away at it, because the reality of it is the more area we can fence, the better it gets. But like everything in homesteading, it's complicated and it's never that simple.
And it all takes time.
And it all takes time.